Hey, it's Noctis. Subscribe to Vincent Valentine EX Turk channel.
Hello, this is hello March Chaos, this is your King of Night, Vincent Valentine EX Turk, and I am tired like a motherfucker. I went to work and I did 2 hours in the gym, so I'm really tired. But this is actually a video that I've been wanting to make for a long time, so I'm kind of in the Final Fantasy 13 mood anyways right now. So I'm changing gears from 15 and 7 and 10, so I'm going to go straight to 13. Let's talk about what the Fabula Crystallis for anyone who's a beginner. This will only affect people who started Final Fantasy when Final Fantasy 13 2 was around, or even people who play Final Fantasy games before Final Fantasy 13. So this will be the time gap of 2009 to 2013, because they signed a contract. Square Enix signed a contract to make games for Final Fantasy 13 for all those years, because this is how video game directors and stuff like that are just like it is with directors in movies and sports athletes. They sign a contract. They got 4 years. Or how many years to make set for some stuff. Like, let's see, it's like when Disney signs contracts to make Marvel movies. They already have it planned ahead before. I mean, they don't make the movies way before, but they get it planned ahead, So, to make the movies right after that, depending on the timeline. But nonetheless, it's the same thing with that in video games. Now, where's this stuff come from, you ask? It comes from the fact that they were making Final Fantasy 13 games. Even games with the titles that are different than Final Fantasy 13, but they're still part of the Final Fantasy 13 universe. So this would include 15 when it was still Versus 13. Of course, never got developed, but I don't care. We're going to bring Final Fantasy Versus 13 into this because it was Versus 13 first. But nonetheless, we'll start with we'll start with the original Final Fantasy 13, the one that people didn't like so much, which I thought was okay. I actually liked the story 13. It was pretty compelling. I mean, yeah, they kept the turn-based combat, and they could have done things a lot different, and stopped doing what 10 did and made you go on a path rather than, I like myself open world, but that's just me right there. That way you could go back and take side quests. But nonetheless, Final Fantasy 13-1, the very first Final Fantasy 13, was made in 2009. Even though some of the fan base is divided on the issue of Final Fantasy 13, like, some people hated Final Fantasy 13, and that's part of the fandom, and it was divided to who loved or who hated Final Fantasy 13, which is very interesting because the way I see it, it sold pretty well. It sold pretty well because, hypocritically, people who hated Final Fantasy 13, well, it was seen in their collections. Even people that are like extremely game elitists, that talk shit on this game actually own a copy. So, ironically, it sold very well. So, because of that, they had enough money to make 13-2, which 13-2 was already planned way before. That's why you see the ending with Fang and Vanille. You see the ending of Fang and Vanille. So right now we're focused on the Lightning Saga before we add Type 0 and Versus 13. So Final Fantasy 13 is, happened, and it spawns a sequel because the ending was a cliffhanger. So 13-2 came around, and with 13-2, let me get to 13. With 13-2, this added new mechanics. You kind of played as 2 new characters, plus the leveling system was a lot easier because people complained about the level system, and understandably so. People did complain about the leveling system. you know, and 13.1, which, yes, I gotta agree, the 11 system was ass. I'm not gonna lie to that, you know. I'm not gonna become a liar and just, you know, sit there and lie, saying it was the best thing ever. And because it wasn't. I mean, let's just be quite honest, it wasn't the best. It wasn't the best. I think they could have done a lot better when they didn't, you know. So, 13.2 fixed some of the issues. You know, some of the issues were fixed. So, some of the issues were fixed in 13.2. And also, there's a time traveling mechanic. And I'll say 13.2 actually had the best Final Fantasy 13 villain of all time. And I'm sorry, Benevelza, move over. Caius was the best villain because his backstory was tragic, and he had that Sephiroth type of mentality, and he's destroyed a bunch of timelines. So I don't think you could get worse than Caius. Oh wait, no, you could. It's called Arden, but you know, I guess Arden would be appropriate since we're going to be talking about Versus 13. But nonetheless, 13.2 came out 2012. No, was it 2012 yet? Was it 2012? No, it's 2011. No, it came out. I was wrong. 2011. 2011. And this is funny because 2011, Dissidia Duodecim came out. So Lightning was added on the roster, but didn't get to have her new costume in Final Fantasy 13.2 in Duodecim. But nonetheless, it came out 2011. And the reason why I said this is very significant, you know why I said this is significant that they make video games for Final Fantasy 13 doing it? Because they signed a year contract for 4 years. So they've been making Final Fantasy 13 games for 4 years to continue because they plan their sequels ahead. Now, 15 is done. They're just patched up DLCs in 15. So there's actually no sequels to 15. But they do plan their sequels ahead of time. I think 7 was the only one that was special with that because it was an anniversary thing and people love 7 the best, and understandably so. But whatever you say, 13 is the worst or 13 is good, whether you praise it, hate it, it still made sequels and still made bank. So after 13.2, 2012 or 2013, Lightning's Return, the last game of the Lightning trilogy. I call this the Lightning Saga because all these games focus on Lightning and her family, pretty much her and her sister Sarah. So 13, or you could call this the official Final Fantasy 13.3, but it's called, the original title is called Lightning's Return, Final Fantasy 13, but I still call it Final Fantasy 13.3 because this is the last part of the Lightning Saga. Now, what happens in the Lightning Saga is Lightning, pretty much, you finally get a good ending after you defeat Benevelza because she gets tricked into saving the world for a god that wasn't going to actually resurrect Sarah in the beginning. Spoiler alert if you haven't played it. And you have most people won't play it anyways because you only have like 7 days to save the world. If you didn't like Zelda, Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, you're not going to like Lightning's Return. It's pretty much Majora's Mask fused with Final Fantasy 13. And characters are changed in this. The variants of Snow and everybody else is changed in this. And even Caius. So if you're a big fan of Caius, just get prepared for the change that you're going to be seeing when you play this game. Then, after the Lightning Saga ends, in between, there's 2 games to be released. Final Fantasy Type 0 and Final Fantasy Versus 13. Now, if I could properly place them in the correct timeline, I would have to say Final Fantasy Type 0 is the beginning. As you see in my fan theory, Record Keeper Emina keeps records of everything Type 0 did. The first l'Cie, the first fal'Cie, years and years and years, another millennia, Final Fantasy 13 happens. And then the whole Lightning Saga happens. Then after the Lightning Saga comes the end of Pulse and stuff like that. Well, I don't know if EOS is still in Pulse. I think they just changed it. But originally in Versus 13, Insomnia was in Pulse. So this will pretty much be the Armageddon. pretty much, I call it the years without Benevelza's watch. Even though it's changed now to 15. You know, so instead of an Armageddon world by the disappearance of Benevelza, in 15 it's changed to the Star Scourge by Ifrit's hands, you know. So with that, now what does this mean, you say? It's just a change, just to make the story different, because 15 is a different entity than Versus 13. Even though it has the same characters, but since Versus 13 it has not been released, it's no longer canon. Now they may make a world of Versus or something, a homage like a cutscene or a story mode in the 10 years, in Noctis' 10 years, you know, to make a little homage for it, but it's still not going to be Versus 13 because the Final Fantasy 13 overtones are taken out of the game completely. But in the original Versus 13, this is actually the world that pretty much Lightning saved, but you know, the Versus 13 is like probably like millions of years after the Lightning trilogy. So Lightning is no longer alive. You know, or at least if she is, she's just nowhere to be found. She disappears. Something happened to her. Maybe the Nephilim Empire found her and killed her. Who knows? Because she probably was an astral. Or maybe, fan theory, she could have been Eos. Because, I mean, she's still Etro. And at the end of Final Fantasy 13 too, she was still Etro. Even Benevelza called Lightning Etro. You know, the new Etro. That's why Benevelza was able to get in contact with Lightning. Because Benevelza created the original Etro. And Lightning took her place. So, what that means is that since Eos died in Final Fantasy 15, this would also mean, if this is in the Versus 13 world, they changed the story a little bit. Instead of the tragic death of Eos for creating the Lucius Kylan bloodline, maybe Lightning could, as Etro, probably created the Lucius Kylan family in the Versus 13 verse, and the non-canon verse created Noctis. And not Noctis himself, but his family. And Arden probably killed Lightning. Thus, since there's no God watching the world falls into chaos and darkness in that world. Since there's no Star Scourge. You know, we don't know what of the astrals except for Etro, because remember, if this is still at Versus 13 at this point, and in this trilogy, because that's what 15 originally was, they just changed the story. That means Etro got killed. Lightning got killed. After creating the Lucius Kylan bloodline, Arden killed Lightning. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but Lightning's strong, Devin. Lightning is strong, yeah, but Arden's strong. Even though this is Versus 13, you gotta remember how powerful Arden was. The only reason why Arden easily lost to Noctis in the first place at the end of Final Fantasy 15 is because Noctis got the power of the God of Light. Noctis is pretty much the new Benevelza. He's got the God of Light power. He's more than just a King of Light. He's a God of Light. So, you know, that's why he was able to trash Arden. But in the Versus 13 world, we don't know exactly what happened because it was never released. So we can concur, instead of the tragic death of Eos, it was the tragic death of Lightning, or Etro, by the hands of Arden, because Arden would still kind of be the same. They take the same base, even though Idols would be the main villain. It was not to say that, what if in the Versus 13 world, now what if in the Versus 13 world, Arden is actually a Fal'Cie? And this one, the last Fal'Cie, the very last, and he was somehow created by Benevelza, if this was still the Versus 13 world. Think of it. Arden has lived for 3,000 years. Even though it's changed in the final game in 15, in the Versus 13 world, things are changed because it's Final Fantasy 13.